Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar, How to Get a Head Start with Advanced TV in 2019. Thanks for joining us. I'm Mindy Trahal, Head of Content for Europe at DigiDay, and I'm your moderator this morning. Today's webinar is sponsored by dataxu. Founded in 2009 on the premise that data science could help make marketing better, dataxu enables marketing and media professionals to use data to improve their advertising. It empowers them to connect with real people across all channels, including TV, capturing consumers' attention when and where it matters most. We all know that getting consumers' attention is increasingly challenging, as people's habits, behaviours and expectations are constantly evolving. It's become even more important to know who is behind these screens. With that in mind, today we'll be covering the following: how Europe's viewing habits are continuing to evolve and what this means for marketers, new opportunities available now in advanced TV advertising, 3 use cases for connected TV in Europe, and of course, how to get a head start with advanced TV in 2019. There'll be an opportunity for questions after the presentation, which is around 30 minutes long. So take the opportunity to quiz our presenter today and stay with us until the end. You can submit questions at any time via the GoToWebinar panel, and everyone who is registered for today's webinar will receive an email with a recording of the session tomorrow. So today we're joined by Mike Shaw, Vice President Europe at dataxu. He is responsible for the sales teams across Europe with the objective of growing revenues across region and deepening relationships with clients. Prior to joining dataxu, Mike spent 11 years at Comscore, where he ran the UK sales team who worked across media planning, advertising effectiveness and analytics solutions. Mike has also co-authored several papers around digital effectiveness and have been recognised by the Advertising Research Foundation. Before joining Comscore, Mike spent 7 years with Forrester Research, so we're in very good hands this morning. Let's get started. Mike, over to you.
Mindy, thank you very much. That's very kind. Good morning. As we said, I'm Mike Shaw, VP for Europe at dataxu. We are, for those of you who don't know, an independent software organization who facilitate data-driven advertising on TV. And as we've outlined, over the next 30 minutes, we're going to cover the changing nature of the way people watch television, how the threats that these changes bring also herald opportunity for the industry, and some specific examples of what advertisers and agencies can be doing now in Europe. As mentioned, we do have the opportunities for Q&A. Doubtless, we won't be able to cover absolutely everything that people are interested in during the course of this webinar. So please do use the chat functionality as we go through this to make sure that what you're looking for gets covered. First up, let's take a look at the changing consumption patterns for TV content that drive the opportunities we're going to be talking about this morning. Fundamental to all of this is understanding of the vital importance of television over time. It's been the preeminent media over the last 60+ years for building brands and generating sales. Over 98% of consumers in the main European markets now have access to TV and actively watch that. And engagement is incredibly high, with Ofcom's latest ICMR report showing an average of 3.5 hours per day per person watching linear TV. Now, with that type of attention, advertising has duly followed, and the current television advertising market across just the UK, France and Germany exceeds £12 billion per year. There is, though, a structural issue for broadcasters, and that is how television content is being consumed. Linear growth has tailed off and is in decline amongst certain audiences, notably younger viewers. Data for the UK drawn from BARB, which is the official UK TV measurement body, along with the IPA Touchpoint survey and the regulatory body in the UK, Ofcom, show us that the amount of linear TV declined by over 40 minutes per day on average, from 3 hours 18 to 2 hours 37 minutes in the UK by the end of 2017. But broadcasters haven't simply lost all of that attention. When we overlay the other types of viewing, a very, very different picture emerges. When we add back TV playback alone, which is people watching TV programming on catch-up, we get 30 minutes of that decline back again. When we then add broadcaster video on demand services, we see another increase that gets us back another 10 minutes. Over the decade, broadcasters have actually only lost a minute of that time on average in the UK. The key point here is that TV is fragmenting, not declining. And it's this fragmentation that is the catalyst for new opportunities in the advertising market, because it necessitates new ways of working to address these new opportunities. The top light blue bar is really the issue for broadcasters. That overall time spent per day seems to be plateauing, and other VOD services sit outside of the broadcast industry are starting to eat into the overall share. So let's focus on the broadcaster addressable opportunity for a moment. In the UK, Barb measured viewing shows that 7% of viewing is no longer on live linear television. This increases to 15% for specific audience groups, namely in this instance 16 to 34 age group, who are a very valuable TV trading audience. We're about to see that the spread of viewing across devices, which presents a huge opportunity to target consumers with high quality television ads directly on their device, is impacted by this trend. So let's focus on those devices for a second. Data from the IPA's Touchpoint survey for the UK shows us that almost 1/3 of viewers use VOD via a TV set in any given week. That's a long drop down to the next most popular device, which is a PC or laptop. Then we're closely followed by the tablets at 8.8%, and smartphone actually lags with 5.3%. And a key takeaway here is that the big screen is still the screen of choice for consumers when they can. There are obviously different consumer use cases for streaming. One of the examples we'll look at a little bit later is around genres and specifically sport, and the requirement essentially to watch that wherever you possibly can live. And that means if you aren't in front of a big screen, you'll revert to the next best and keep going down, but you will want to watch that if you're in that target audience. But what we shouldn't be totally blinkered by is the things that we see around us every day, the commuting habits of maybe the young media professionals that many of us work with. Not everything is happening on the small screen of our smartphones whilst we're on the tube or train. At the end of 2017, Ofcom looked at the proportion of UK viewers accessing different streaming services. And again, this demonstrates the dominant position the largest TV companies still have. The top two most popular services are from the BBC and from ITV, whilst YouTube and Netflix lag in third and fourth respectively. In the largest three European markets, more than half of all households are projected to have a smart TV by next year, meaning there's even greater opportunity to access streaming services, and that the advertising opportunities which we have previously described as this idea of emerging or up and coming will very much be mainstream for those wishing to take advantage of them. The changing landscape, especially within our core advertising medium of television, means significant challenges for media planners and buyers. The brand building imperative for brands isn't changing. The fragmentation of media and across new screens continues to make reach and frequency, measurement and control harder and harder. The industry dynamics around both existing trading models plus bundling and packaging can be inherently unwieldy for the new world. And measurement is critical to being able to truly attribute value. And the pace of measurement is struggling to keep up with the rate of change. In the UK, for example, Barb's Project Dovetail has made great strides in getting to an unduplicated 4-screen viewing report. But even this is 5 years into the project, and there are still years to go on the roadmap for the official currency that already supports over £5 billion worth of UK TV advertising investment. This trade-off between speed and quality is an inherent dilemma for the measurement industry, but brands and consumers certainly aren't sacrificing on the pace aspect. We've talked about this idea of brand building, and in their 2013 publication, The Long and Short of It, Les Binet and Peter Field analysed around 1,000 campaigns from the IPA's data bank to understand the relationship between different types of advertising and sales. The result was arguably one of the most important charts to guide marketing thinking. Direct response campaigns or activation efforts show significant sales uplifts, but they didn't last very long, and the sales impact quickly returns to the same baseline each time, the red line you see on this chart. Branding focused campaigns had a slower but more sustainable sales lift over time, and really importantly, the baseline increases each time, leading to a more resilient and sustained sales impact in the long term. And this is incredibly important as more and more marketing organizations have adopted a more short-termist approach, and the requirement and pressure on quarterly results tend towards a favoritism for short-term impacts. Now, television has been the prime brand building medium, as we said, for 60 plus years, so it's incredibly important that the advances in technology aren't deployed purely to chase short-term gain versus finding new ways of amplifying the peaks of branding instead. So amidst this changing consumer behaviour and the continued imperative for advertisers and their agency partners to ensure branding success, how is the industry responding? We're going to take a look at a few factors that are turning this challenge into an opportunity. If we could sum it up all in one phrase, it's really all about the data. It's our belief that TV and data together will lead to better outcomes for brands. If we go back into the not so distant past, the TV data available was really only coming from the rating agencies, Barb in the UK or Médiamétrie in France or Nielsen in the US, based upon a small but highly representative panel of viewers to understand who was watching what, how that differed by target audience, etc. This really helped with the understanding of reach and frequency and ratings for the most popular programming, and as an input for attribution measurement, for econometric studies, but actually had very limited application in understanding niche audiences, very small reach programming, or the behavior of specific individuals. Now, the digitization of everything, and yes, we're including TV in here because even TV is digital now, means that there are significantly more options for data streams that can be brought to bear on television advertising. Specifically, return path and set-top box data, application player data, registration data from logged-in users of VOD services, and even first-party data from registered and consented opted-in consumers that many advertisers now hold. So when we add additional data into the mix, what does TV and data actually get us? Examples would include demonstrable incremental reach from viewers using less, or in some instances, no linear TV anymore. We don't really have this notion of cord cutters, as we talked about them in the States, but there are people who are effectively, through their behavior, opting out of traditional or linear broadcasting environments in favor of on-demand, on-streaming services, etc. The same high impact, high recall, emotionally resonant, brand safe, and importantly, increasingly relevant ad formats. That application of targeting does allow an increased amount of relevance to be deployed within TV ad strategies. And finally, in this slide, the more ability to measure the value of television by joining up exposure and sales, by demonstrating incrementality, and by this ability to properly control frequency. Our long-term bet on this is that these changes bring more money back into the broadly termed TV industry. The data advantage has historically resided with newer players like the walled gardens, and those organisations have focused on the quality content required to gain viewer attention, the thing that they lacked. Now the data playing field is levelling. Broadcasters have that content, those quality content assets in spades. So we do believe that we're actually about to see a resurgence of the traditional television organisations. So let's have a look at how that's working in practice right now. First up, EBX, European Broadcast Exchange, is the partnership between a number of leading broadcasters across Europe, including TF1, Channel 4, ProSieben, and Mediaset. Interestingly, one of the largest differences we see between the US and European TV advertising markets is in the trading mechanisms. In Europe, we have a very concentrated set of sales points versus a far more fragmented landscape in the States. Until recently, this concentration has always been bounded by geography in Europe. But EBX is solving for the global brands who want to deploy pan-European campaigns, and their agency can now work with EBX as a single buying point in order to do that. EBX, in this instance, their collective broadcaster registered user base now numbers 91 million viewers and increasing. So we talk about this idea of reach. We're now going to supranational reach levels with EBX. Eurosport, instead of looking at the overall audience size, actually focusing on audience quality, and this idea of some of the age groups, some of the people who are hardest to reach within linear environments now, whose choice of viewing opts out of linear more often than other age groups. They have a very high density of those audiences that sit within those targets, again making it an incredibly valuable player to be talking to as the linear viewing continues to decline. SmartClip, the global advertising platform that works with broadcasters and has particular strength in Germany and Spain, for example, has 41 million CTV opportunities per month and growing. And STV, which is effectively ITV for Scotland, sees a view-through rate of 98.6% in its latest monthly filings on its advanced TV ad units, which is a huge step change over the typical digital video equivalent, unless there is a significant premium being paid for completed view guarantees. So let's turn our attention to that measurement point. Focusing on the measurement aspect, the new world for TV does look different. We can still measure ratings, reach and frequency, but we can now do so across different device types and different media. Additionally, we can now add in measures like completion rate across apps, devices and creatives, which helps get a better understanding of the true economics of different media buys. We can get a better view of the impact of sequencing messaging and the way that paths to purchase really work for some products and services. And as we've already alluded to, there are more extensive data streams available that can be matched against sales data, measuring the impact of both the short terms, but more importantly, the long-term impact of how brand building is translating into better outcomes for retailers, for advertisers, etc. So let's have a look at 3 specific use cases for advanced television today. The first is around incremental reach for your linear TV plan. Sports is a very important content genre, unlikely to be watched on catch-up. When we look at the numbers, and if you go and have a look at the 4-screen report from Barb recently, where it breaks out content by different genres, what you can see is that the proportion of viewing that's live for sports outstrips the other content categories significantly. So sports is this content genre unlikely to be watched on catch-up, so people go to their best device to watch it in real time. And in this case, Eurosport make use of their CTV capability to allow an advertiser to increase their linear plan reach from 68% of the target audience by 15 percentage points to 83 by using this connected TV advertising. The second example is around extending digital video campaigns. So as we approach Christmas, even more advertisers are in market for digital video campaigns. And an example here would be using STV's Marcella box sets. An agency buying 800,000 views ends up with an incredibly low cost per completed view, despite the premium pricing that STV apply, because of the relatively high view-through rate. That 98.6% we saw beforehand means a cost per completed view of around just 3 pence. The final example in here is really around cross-device storytelling. So in the UK right now, for those of you who are familiar with it, the supermarket Aldi are telling the Christmas story of Kevin the Carrot through an evolving storyline, which has already launched, and I believe we're currently at parts 2 or even 3 of that story. And it's an example of how this gives brands control around the order in which messages are shown and storylines developed. In Aldi's case, they'd actually be able to reasonably sequence that so that the vast majority of people are seeing the ads in the order that they are expected to do so. In this case, EBX, the partnership between a number of the leading broadcasters across Europe that we talked about, offers advertisers the ability to add a response-orientated message to people who've already seen the branding ads and complete that story, or alternatively to ensure that the first message is shown to those who are as yet unexposed. One of the largest differences we see in this approach is that really this has been only possible in the digital environment beforehand, using cookie-based techniques. Actually, through a different measurement framework and new technology, this is now moving to the big screen. So let's have a look at how that first instance actually worked in practice. This is an example from a US car manufacturer who were a client of dataxu and who were after incremental reach on top of their linear campaign in America. Their agency started with the linear plan and audience definition, and then worked with the dataxu platform and specifically our total TV offering in order to identify households being exposed to the linear broadcast portion of the campaign. As a result of the changing TV consumption patterns we observed earlier, they weren't getting the coverage they wanted amongst their target audience. so focused on augmenting the campaign within a connected TV buy that reached a majority or all streaming audiences as well. When measured overall, the streaming audience delivered via the CTV portion increased the reach of the linear plan by over 21%, and that delivered over 900,000 incremental households on top of that original buy. These orders of magnitude demonstrate significant value that exists today for brands and why the capability to deploy advanced television campaign strategies is becoming a core requirement for their agency partners. This concludes the broadcast portion of the webinar. We'd very much like to discuss your own advanced TV plans further. Do drop us an email at the address shown if this is relevant for you. Thank you for your attention so far. And I think we have some questions coming in that we wanted to cover.
Yes, we do. Thank you, Mike. Thanks for that insight today. So just a reminder for all the attendees, a full recording of the webinar will be made available for you in a follow-up email tomorrow. But let's move on, as Mike said, to the Q&A portion of the webinar. As a reminder, you can submit these via the questions tab at the GoToWebinar panel. So let's get started. So the first question kind of is around frequency. So how can frequency be controlled across multiple providers, and can this be solved via the DSP?
Good question. The frequency debate across multiple providers is an incredibly important one. In very few instances is everything going through either one system or through one broadcaster. What we're actually seeing is that there's a bigger and bigger importance on this idea of identity management, understanding who the consumers are behind different devices, irrespective of the delivery mechanism. For dataxu, we solve this through actually the blue box you see on your screen here, this OneView software system, which is effectively a graph of graphs, the ability to bring in multiple sources of consumer identity and deduplicate all the way through, so that even whether it's our DSP, whether it's other DSPs or mechanisms delivering the campaign and the impressions or impacts, they can actually be reconciled within a single audience management platform effectively in order to get at that. So that is certainly, that's our way of doing it, and it's not just about the DSP. It does need to link back to one of these audience management systems.
Great. I think this next question is related to one of the examples you gave, but it's what was the incremental impact / effectiveness of the additional reach?
So that's a very good question. So so traditionally, often reach would be an objective in and of itself. So being able to demonstrate that incrementality, being able to just get at that audience that linear plans either weren't appropriate for because there was no opportunity to reach people on linear, or the incremental price of reaching that extra percentage point on linear just continued to get too high, was fulfillment of the objective in and itself. But the question includes that term effectiveness. And I think this is really where we get back to the importance of being able to bring multiple data sets to bear, and that ability to start identifying households and individuals exposed to campaigns, and tracing that then through to sales or revenue for the advertiser, kind of irrespective of how long that takes. We're not in the world of purely looking at cookie windows now, or attribution timelines of 48 hours post click or post view. This is more about being able to look at a longitudinal view of consumer behavior, and that comes from a data strategy built upon as much first party data as people can muster, with all of the necessary consents around the way that that's used, and that then ability to match that with your media partners, and your agency's ability to take that data and match it with your media partners in order to genuinely understand what the impact over a decent amount of time, the right amount of time for media effectiveness to properly be measured, how that's working.
Okay, brilliant. The next question is an interesting one because not everyone has kind of these big budgets. So the question is, does advanced TV allow the testing of much smaller budgets to traditional TV?
Absolutely. So a really good example of this would be something like Sky, who launched an advanced TV format, AdSmart, a number of years ago in the UK. And what that absolutely allowed for was this entirely new generation of advertisers to come into the UK TV market, often focused on being able to target ads on a region. And way smaller than the existing ITV regions, actually getting down to city-based campaigns. That brought an entirely new generation of advertisers into the market with far smaller budgets than would traditionally have been required in order to launch huge national campaigns. It's a particularly important question now because of the price of TV goes up as you get to the end of the year. There's a lot more advertisers wanting to be in market. The supply is more constrained, so the pricing is impacted by the way the market dynamics work. And so when we look at the opportunity for then connected TV for these more advanced TV formats, there are absolutely ways that advertisers and agency partners who might not be TV buyers, who don't go through the upfront process, who aren't carrying the type of purchasing power of some of the biggest agency holding companies, to get involved in these formats.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. This one is quite specific. So how is reach potential for Switzerland?
So it's a very good question. We've covered mostly the main European markets as context for this webinar, but fundamentally the broadcaster landscape within Switzerland allows for advanced opportunities or advanced television opportunities there as well. The key point which hopefully has come through in the webinar is really that despite the changing consumer behavior and the way that consumers are moving towards new devices, actually the extent to which the advertising market changes is really driven by the pace at which broadcasters want to move. So without being familiar with the specific plans of the Swiss broadcasters, it's in their essentially the ball is in their court around how fast or otherwise that market moves. They have a position of strength based on the existing dominance of the advertising market, but certainly the display market, once the search element is stripped out, because there are lots of headlines around how digital is now bigger than television. Absolutely, in a number of markets that's the case, but when you actually look at a like-for-like, format, TV as a display or display and video still beats the digital channels. The interesting part for the Swiss broadcasters to look at would be that light blue chart of their own viewing data, which is going to the other VOD services, because fundamentally the size and the tangent that is working on will determine the expediency with which they need to be addressing this market. Obviously, the Swiss market is smaller in terms of the addressable audiences, but fundamentally the technology providers who've now moved into this space actually mean that the types of investment that broadcasters needed to make to enable these types of formats are nothing like the scale that they've used and built to deliver on more traditional advertising formats.
Brilliant, thanks, Mike. The next question is, do dataxu plan and buy for clients who want to work direct?
So dataxu isn't a planning and buying organization in of itself, but we provide the tools to do so. Typically, the model is that our clients work through their agency partner. The agency partner are the people who are managing campaigns, planning campaigns, getting results, optimizing campaigns on behalf of the brand. In some instances, and certainly in a new sector of brand, the direct-to-consumer brand, actually some cases agencies don't exist, or if a brand has actually brought everything, certainly for the programmatic teams in-house, maybe there isn't an agency partner. In those instances, dataxu typically is on hand as a help to the service layer, but when those in-housing efforts happen, actually the skills have been brought in-house themselves, so the brands will typically end up operating those campaigns on their own. Certainly we're here in the short term to help as those skills are ramped up within the brand, but our long-term vision would be that brands are running all of their own activity in the absence of an agency.
Great. We've got a technical question here. So how are you mapping connected device IDs to cookie IDs?
So this is all around the graph of graphs that sits within the OneView technology. So we do it through a number of methods. The proprietary technology is the heart of it, but within that environment, we actually bring in a huge amount of data partners in order to maximize our chances of making those matches. So we would work not only with the likes of Tapad, but also likes of MaxMind, and then importantly, data from broadcasters themselves, as well as brands, in order to understand who's genuinely behind that advertising opportunity. There is a very significant impact of legislation in this area, and GDPR was something we've been working through for 18 months prior to its enactment in May of this year, in order to understand the data partners that could remain as part of that environment. We lost some, and we lost some scale in that data because it didn't carry the necessary consent and opted in frameworks, but fundamentally the way that you do it is through, rather than relying on a single source of identity, rely on as many sources of identity as humanly possible, lay them over each other in real time in order to get the best match rates possible.
Great. And we've got another kind of budget question here. Could smart TV be an alternative for advertisers that can't afford actual TV campaigns now?
Yes, it can do. Smart TV is essentially another one of the over-the-top formats that sit outside of the existing the buying framework. So if you're not at the top table, you're not at the upfronts. The ability to go to players, for example, a smart clip, and deliver ads into smart T or through the smart TV onto the big screen is absolutely an option, and it's not upfront budget levels required in order to be able to do that. So we're certainly seeing a growing number of advertisers, and their agencies who are now experimenting with different budget levels on these emerging formats as kind of test and learn environments to really get their understanding up of this amazing branding media, TV, but how it can now be used in new ways.
Great. The next question is whether you have any data or perspective on the value of interactive video formats within an advanced TV strategy.
So we wouldn't be the best people to talk to about that. Interestingly, it does, though, bridge one of the big themes that we've been talking about in this webinar, which is this understanding of the value of short-term versus a long-term perspective. We've identified this idea that TV and data are better together, and we certainly believe that the results, for example, we've seen from Binet and Field from the IPA data bank highlight that you forget the long term at your peril. That said, the ability to then have television as a medium span more of the consumer journey, not just the very top funnel, but actually get into more of the lower, the mid and lower funnel as well, and the ability of interacting within TV formats being a huge part of that is something that can only help the broadcast and the broadcaster advertising share go up. Typically, anybody who's been looking for those types of effects has had to go elsewhere. They've gone to media that aren't TV, and they've gone to players that aren't broadcasters. This actually means that advertisers can do more of what they're looking for within the product and solution set that broadcasters are offering.
Great. We've got one last question, and it's a broad one. TV has worked well for 50 years. Why are we breaking that?
That's a very good one. So I think the idea of breaking it isn't really what we're saying is going on here. It's not about breaking what has worked. It's merely that the application of data and technology on top of what was already worked can allow it to continue and work better, if you like. The changes in consumer behavior are kind of breaking the existing model rather than the industry self-harming. So there needs to be a response from the TV industry in order to maintain and grow ad share versus the new players who have a more short-termist but fundamentally a highly data-led focus and a very compelling sales pitch into media buyers right now. What we're saying isn't about needlessly breaking something that's already worked. It's about ensuring that something that has already worked is safeguarded and made appropriate for the new environment in which consumers are adopting TV and consuming television.
Great. That's all we have time for this morning. Thanks again to Mike, and thanks all of you for joining us today. We hope you're ready for advanced TV in 2019 and beyond. Keep an eye on your inboxes tomorrow for a link to the recording, which you will watch on demand. This webinar is brought to you by DIGIDAY in association with dataxu.